All right. Do you have any engaging plans for the weekend?
Not really. Nothing too crazy.
I think I'm going to read Frederick Douglass's What the 4th of July Means to the Enslaved again.
Oh, interesting.
He was a good looking dude, but he was the most photographed living human being in the 19th century.
Oh,
He
interesting. I
was,
didn't
he
know
was
that.
a total megastar.
Sounds like it.
One of the things that he said about photography that I think is just amazing is that photography in a stroke gives the opportunity for everyone to have a portrait made of themselves that rivals heads of state and show the world exactly how they want the world to see them. I thought
I like that.
that's pretty awesome.
Yeah.
And the fastest growing cottage industry and professional industry for Black Americans at the time was actually in the small business arena was photo studios, which
Okay.
is pretty cool. And when during the Harlem Renaissance, and then later with the FSA, the Farm Services Administration, uh, some of the most effective photographers documenting the United States were the Black American photographers who were following after Frederick Douglass's words of wisdom. So pretty cool.
That is very cool. I like that. Hmm.
Well, today I wanted to, unless anybody has any questions, and by anybody I mean the pretend people that didn't make it on the call live today. What I wanted to do is I wanted to talk about the contemporary processes, and it dawned on me that most people are going to be out of town until probably Sunday night. So I think I'm going to have to go ahead and move everything back a week or so. And that'll be fine because I didn't realize that this week is pretty well shot as a productive week anyway.
Okay.
Oh, I think the speech is what means the 4th of July to the Negro, and it's pretty impactful.
That's awesome. We'll have to look at that.
Anyway, I don't know if this is going to make it into the YouTube recording that we had when I put it on YouTube. It has before, and it also hasn't a couple times. So I'm going to put a link directly to it underneath the what's it called? The attendance link to this class. So for anybody listening, if it does not make it, just watch it. And one of the 5 things that you say has to be an observation from this particular video. And I'm going to go ahead and watch this video, and then we'll talk about contemporary processes and conceptual art and wrapping. So let me get to this. All right. This is a short 4-minute presentation, but it really gets at the root of the kind of thinking that we're dealing with when we talk about these contemporary art processes, particularly conceptual art and the conceptual art that we do with wrapping. Can you see, Whitley, can you see the TEDx screen?
Yes, I can.
Okay.
What is reality? Knowledge? The meaning of life? Big topics you might tackle figuratively, explaining existence as a journey down a road or across an ocean, a climb, a war, a book, a thread, a game, a window of opportunity, or an all too short-lived flicker of flame. 2,400 years ago, one of history's most famous thinkers said life is like being chained up in a cave, forced to watch shadows flitting across a stone wall. pretty cheery, right? That's actually what Plato suggested in his Allegory of the Cave, found in Book 7 of the Republic, in which the Greek philosopher envisioned the ideal society by examining concepts like justice, truth, and beauty. In the allegory, a group of prisoners have been confined in a cavern since birth with no knowledge of the outside world. They are chained facing a wall, unable to turn their heads, while a fire behind them gives off a faint light. Occasionally, people pass by the fire carrying figures of animals and other objects that cast shadows on the wall. The prisoners name and classify these illusions, believing they're perceiving actual entities. Suddenly, one prisoner is freed and brought outside for the first time. The sunlight hurts his eyes, and he finds the new environment disorienting. When told that the things around him are real, while the shadows were mere reflections, he cannot believe it. The shadows appeared much clearer to him, but gradually his eyes adjust until he can look at reflections in the water, at objects directly, and finally at the sun, whose light is the ultimate source of everything he has seen. The prisoner returns to the cave to share his discovery, but he is no longer used to the darkness and has a hard time seeing the shadows on the wall. The other prisoners think the journey has made him stupid and blind and violently resist any attempts to free them. Plato introduces this passage as an analogy of what it's like to be a philosopher trying to educate the public. Most people are not just comfortable in their ignorance, but hostile to anyone who points it out. In fact, the real-life Socrates was sentenced to death by the Athenian government for disrupting the social order, and his student Plato spends much of the Republic disparaging Athenian democracy, while promoting rule by philosopher kings. With the cave parable, Plato may be arguing that the masses are too stubborn and ignorant to govern themselves. But the allegory has captured imaginations for 2,400 years because it can be read in far more ways. Importantly, the allegory is connected to the theory of forms developed in Plato's other dialogues, which holds that, like the shadows on the wall, things in the physical world are flawed reflections of ideal forms, such as roundness or beauty. In this way, the cave leads to many fundamental questions, including the origin of knowledge, the problem of representation, and the nature of reality itself. For theologians, the ideal forms exist in the mind of a creator. For philosophers of language viewing the forms as linguistic concepts, the theory illustrates the problem of grouping concrete things under abstract terms. And others still wonder whether we can really know that the things outside the cave are any more real than the shadows. As we go about our lives, can we be confident in what we think we know? Perhaps one day a glimmer of light may punch a hole in your most basic assumptions. Will you break free to struggle towards the light, even if it costs you your friends and family? Or stick with comfortable and familiar illusions? Truth or habit? Light or shadow? Hard choices, but if it's any consolation, you're not alone. There are lots of us down here.
I really like that short little video because it talks about the allegory of the cave really well. And this is something that we see echoes of this concept throughout how art and art history and a lot of how people even do things today. And it helps give us a framework we can use to further our precision when we do critiques, but also to help us as we articulate how we view art around us or even how we articulate our own work. Have you ever been asked to write an artist statement or a statement about an exhibit or anything like that for some of your own work?
Kind of. I did one of the intro to digital imaging classes, and for our final project, we had to do like a gallery of photos. And he didn't necessarily say that we had to do statements, but he kind of led that way and said that, like, this is usually what you do. but it wasn't like a requirement of the project, but he just kind of touched on like what an artist statement was.
Well, I think that, we're artists because we haven't been able to keep a job writing. We use our words in the work that we make. And so one of the most difficult things for a lot of artists is to articulate their own issues, their own resolutions, their own motivations behind the work that they do. And I think it is a really good exercise. And if anybody's interested, I can give you links to, there's a couple artists and gallerists online who do a really good job helping artists to articulate their own work. And it is a challenge. And when you are trying to describe somebody else's work or go through the last two steps of the artistic critique, where you're trying to extrapolate what a person's worldview or describe why something is successful, it can be a challenge. Have you ever, and I'm kind of switching gears a couple of things because I'll take some information from each of these things to tie it up, but have you ever gone to an art festival and had somebody who was saying, for $5 or $10, they'll do a caricature? Have you ever seen that?
Yeah, I have seen it.
Well, and sometimes they're really, really, really bad, but most of the times they're really good and they're a lot of fun. When you see that and you recognize, oh yeah, I can see myself in that, what are you recognizing? What are the elements that you see? And that's a really good question to ask. And the reason all this ties together is the idea of the allegory of the forms and Plato's cave is an attempt to articulate how we use different elements to form opinions, to describe, to categorize, to use our words to explain to somebody else what we're thinking. And when I'm talking about caricatures, when somebody does a caricature of Mick Jagger, there are certain features that they'll exaggerate, but there's certain things that they try really hard to make sure that they keep the same so that we know that it's Mick Jagger, whatever those elements are. And that's true of a lot of celebrities. I've seen caricaturists on boardwalks and things like that who are really good at observing people and picking out the elements about the person's features or what they do, which are significant to that particular individual. And they're able to really capitalize on how that person sees themselves, because then they can make fun of it, and in a pleasant way so that the person's happy. And I've also seen an occasion where caricaturists got it wrong and really made somebody angry. But most of the time they're very good. And then we look at a movie like Matrix. The very first Matrix movie came out 25 years ago. And Neo is in rags. He goes on the chair in the Nebuchadnezzar. He gets that spike into his nervous system. And when he sees himself again, he sees himself dressed all cool. And Neo, or Morpheus rather, calls it the residual self-image. And I think that's interesting. The reason why that ties in is there is somehow this inarticulate structure that we use to define things like what is beautiful, what does tall mean, how short is short, how much is too hairy, how much is bald, and these are relatively human traits, but also how do we define what a good-looking dog is? How do we define a scraggly cat? And these are things, all of us are getting images in our mind already as we talk about this, but I can pretty much guarantee that those images are not going to line up with anybody else's. However, if we have a conversation, generally we will do a pretty good job of agreeing what a scraggly cat is, what a good-looking dog is, for example. And those kinds of ideas get down to the root of how we interact with and define reality. I do a lot of, I'm a folklorist, and I work a lot with tradition bearers of different traditions. It dovetails really well with my chaplaincy work, my pluralist chaplaincy work. One of the things that I've noticed, one of the things that I enjoy doing is collecting ghost stories from people that are sincere. I love that because the people have had a specific experience, and they articulate it in a certain way with the story that's, that's a ghost story. Or a family member has had a very significant experience that also they've articulated as a ghost story. I have spoken with people about this who just dismissed it and said, well, ghosts aren't real. It's just made up nonsense. They don't know what they're doing. It is interesting to me, if you have more than one person seeing the exact same thing, hearing the exact same voice and the same words, and they're able to independently describe the same, obviously the same experience later without comparing stories, then there's something going on. But at the base, the simplest thing is, if there is a physiological change in the person, or that has impacted their view of the world, then it was a real experience. Whether or not somebody else outside could measure it with a multimeter or get it on camera, it doesn't matter, because that individual had the experience. There are things like where EMF, leaking EMF in a home when it's poorly wired, or the old wires are poorly insulated, or the connections aren't correct, that can physiologically cause low-level trauma, like paranoia and other trauma responses in somebody. And it's on a subliminal level, so we don't really know what's going on. But you couple that with something that ends up being a real experience, and it just underscores it. I mean, people can use that to explain something away, but the person who is sincere and talks about the experience, it is a real thing. And so on one hand, reality is something that we interact with collectively, and we share different levels of reality. But all of us have had experiences where, like, especially with family gatherings, where one person has a very different experience than we did, or that another person did over the same event. And it doesn't mean that somebody's escaped reality or the nature of reality has changed. What it means is that reality can, at the same time, be both very subjective and very objective. We can measure it, but also people are going to react to it differently. Now, why are all these important when we talk about art? I think beginning with somebody as brilliant as Marcel Duchamp, who was able to articulate some of these ideas. And then you also get Braque and Picasso, who were also able to articulate this. These three guys came up woke up one day and invented Cubism. Which whether or not you like Cubism, I don't really care. What's important, though, is that Cubism happened at a point in time where people are starting to restructure the foundational understanding of the universe. People are starting to suggest that there might be multiple perspectives that are all equally valid, where it's not just European colonizers having the only opinion that matters, that there's colonists, there's people that are colonized who also have opinions. And the middlemen, the middlemen and women have opinions. It's not just the workers having a perspective. It's not just the business owners having the perspective. It's the people that are providing goods and services to the workers. It's the people that the business owners, their interests that they're trying to protect and maintain. There's lots of perspectives, and they're all equally valid. And then the Cubists were also dealing with, what does it mean to be real? This is where the idea of phenomenology comes about, where reality exists somewhere in that intersection of personal experience and memory and the things in the physical world. Have you ever had the experience where you are walking through your house late at night, or your home late at night, there's no lights on, and you are terrified because you suddenly bump into something that wasn't there a minute, that you knew wasn't there, or you stop all of a sudden because you know that something's there, whether or not it might be. Have you ever had that experience where you can't see, but you know it's there? That is a really good illustration of what phenomenology is. At one point, there were physical presences, but our brains attach a certain level of importance and meaning to those things, so much so that it impacts our behavior. And this is one aspect of phenomenology, but then we're also talking about language. How do we communicate with each other? The idea that 90% of communication is nonverbal is a relatively recent one. I remember it started really coming out in the early 80s. This is something, though, that propagandists and military personnel, police personnel, anybody who's a frontliner on any, they know that they knew this kind of stuff all the time. And a big part of that is that they are in high impact situations a lot where communication is vital, whether or not it's spoken. You get, I don't know if you've ever seen EMT on top of their game in the middle of their work, but they know exactly what to do, and they will know where the pain is by how a person's cheek flinches or how their hand flutters. I mean, they know because they're paying so much attention. And then you get Heidegger was a phenomenologist dealing with language, and one of the things he said was, the moment you choose to use a word, you've also chosen not to use thousands of others, which is kind of an interesting take on language. It calls the mind immediately that as precise as we can be, we're still not going to be precise enough. We're not going to be able to communicate everything that's inside of our head. So we get all that information rolling around, and then we add to it the idea that art is not direct communication. I'm not trying to communicate to you the 17 words that I'm thinking about. What I am trying to do is open up a world of possibility and share it with you, and hopefully both of us can come away a little bit bigger for it. And that's ideally what art does. It's an invitation into the world that's begun by the artist and finished by the viewer, and then continues with that kind of ongoing collaboration. So we get all these things coming together. And what Marcel Duchamp did was specifically irritate the gallerists, but he was trying to get people to think about all those concepts in a way that wasn't beating it to death. He didn't want to have to sit down and have an intellectual conversation. He wanted people to feel their way through that kind of shared creation of our shared reality. And it's interesting to me that the people that weren't outraged by what Marcel Duchamp did, it started them thinking. And then you get these ideas after he started doing his ready-mades. You get the birth of the Bauhaus, which was a design group that started right around World War I. And they started thinking, how can we make common everyday items beautiful to work with and to hold and to live with? How can we make the ordinary extraordinary? Not by making it profound, but just by making it easy to engage with. This is the birth of Jugendstil design. It's the birth of now, people can make fun of IKEA all they want, but there is some really solid design with IKEA. But this is where you get the birth of really beautiful furniture that's not designed to be flabbergasting to the ordinary person, but is designed to be enjoyable to everybody. So these, which is, I think, an indirect result of what Marcel Duchamp was doing as he asked people to engage with those ideas about ready-mades. What makes this art? Why can't a snow shovel be art? Well, it can. that's where we start getting ergonomic design and stuff like that too. All these things. You know, the what you're looking at right now, your computer screen, is based on this thinking. You know, how can we make things beautiful? And when you surf the internet, when you work with your computer, all of it is based firmly in Jugendstil and primarily the Bauhaus design that was started, you know, over 100 years ago. When we look at how homes are designed, the questions that people ask themselves is not just about function, it's about how do we want people to feel? How do we want people to be engaged coming into this home? What does it mean to live today as an individual, as a family, as roommates? And how can we make that more comfortable? Because, you know, the fact of the matter is, it doesn't just matter where the home is or how the outside looks. The decision to buy or move in to an apartment or a new home, a big part of it is going to be the vibes you get as you go through it. And a lot of those vibes are based on these kinds of ideas and principles. What's being communicated in the design? And so when we go to conceptualism, remember I was talking about last week, we talked about ceramicists sculpt with clay, woodworkers sculpt with wood, painters sculpt with paint or work with paint. What do conceptualists work with? They use those kind of materials, but they sculpt directly with the thoughts that somebody's having. That's why they're called conceptualists or conceptual artists. And so I'm going to see if I can find. Oh no, that's wrong. I talked last week about Joseph Kosa's 1 in 3 chairs. And I'm trying to get this. All right, here we go. I'm taking us now to the Museum of Modern Art's website, where they have a really good presentation on conceptual art, particularly Joseph Kosa's 1 in 3 chairs. And we can see this image. Let's see if, I wonder why it's not showing up. Oh, that's hilarious. Awesome. Okay. We talked last week about where's the one chair? Well, the one chair is right there, but it's also what all 3 of these point to. And where are the 3 chairs? Well, there's 3 different views of the chair, a description of it, a photo of it, and then the actual chair, which in a meta sense is also a photo because we're looking at a picture of the whole display. And how does this relate to the allegory of the cave? Well, from one very cursory reading, we could say that the photo, the black and white photo, the documentation, may be the shadow on the cave wall. And this, when the guy is forced outside the cave, this may be what he actually sees. And I can kind of see that because this is 2-dimensional and this is 3-dimensional, or at least we assume it is because, you know, this is a photo of the actual setting. And then this, the description, is more like that idea, the concept of the ideal. You know, what are we moving towards? Where's the chairness of the chair and how would we describe that? And I really like this because what Joseph is doing is, like Marcel Duchamp, but much less confrontationally, trying to get us to think about what makes the chair a chair. Why are these 3 things not quite a chair? Or what makes them, which one of them is the best chair? Are they all equally a chair? He did this with several other items, like one was a clock that he did it with, and it was his 1 in 3 series. There were several others as well. And I love this idea where we're being asked as a viewer, well, not we're being asked, the artist is depending on us as a viewer to be smart and to engage with what's going on. Just like the Braque, Picasso, and Marcel and Duchamp did with Cubism, they were requiring us as viewers to be smart and think about what they were showing us as artwork. It wasn't just something on a plate. And when we have these discussions about ideals and what's real, what's truly real, all this kind of stuff, we may think, well, that's a fairly recent invention, but actually it's not. When we look at canons of human proportion, for example, or even as simple as the birth of a written language, what we're seeing is an idealization of form. Do you remember last week I was mentioning that in Egyptian tomb paintings, you will see the idealized canon of form, where the person has their triangle chest facing the viewer, and their heads are always in profile, and their eyes are always kind of a little wonky, and you can always see every one of the fingers and the thumb and all that kind of stuff. But then 3 feet away, you will see 3 little girls playing on the side of the Nile with their 2 pet ducks, and they'll be in perfect proportion, human proportion. They'll look just like 3 real little kids. And because what the Egyptians were doing, and this wasn't just the Egyptians, this was the Etruscans, Babylonians, Akkadians, Harappans, any other civilization you want to think about. What they were doing is demonstrating how they articulated the ideal of the human form. So they weren't showing real people in these canonized things. They may give a name to it, they may put features on it to show that they're tied into a real person, but instead they are showing the eternal or timeless ideal of that person. So when we go back to this Joseph and the 3 chairs, which I think is a lot better title for this thing. Sounds like it should be a musical. But when you go back and look at this, can you see how he's addressing those kinds of questions of reality and what it means to articulate that kind of shared space? Oh, hey, Sylvia. I'm thinking of this as the physical chair that can actually be used, that somebody can actually be attached to. This is a documentation of that can't be used, but we can identify it. And then this describes what the idea is behind everything. And I think that's fascinating. This was done in, I want to say, 1965. What was going on in the US in 1965? I'm not going to ask you to remember because none of you are that old, but what was going on?
Did that have anything to do with like civil rights or anything like that?
Absolutely.
Okay.
There was the Cold War. That was a big one. There was civil rights. Yeah, that was going on. That had started in 1957, and it was going on strong. You had the Watts riots, about this time. You had a lot of stuff going on where people are claiming the promise that was given to them 100 years earlier. The Cold War was a threat for everybody. Children in school were still watching these terrible videos about duck and cover, where in case you see the nuclear flash, get down under a desk somewhere and kiss your butt goodbye, kind of thing. But there are a lot of significant. Oh, and we were also seeing the beginnings of the decolonization movements that were happening around the world as new countries were formed because the colonizers abandoned the people that were there and or were kicked out, and the people with the biggest guns and nastiest smiles took over. You see a lot of countries that were formed beginning at about this time. And so I think that most people are living in a world where the nature of their relationship with reality was shifting. because there were things that their grandparents could have depend on that had been the same for hundreds and hundreds of years. And now, in less than 10 years, humanity was going from being able to shoot something the size of a football to orbit the planet into actually stepping foot on another world. I mean, that's just astounding. In a single lifespan, you went from outhouses and horse and buggy days to traveling in space. And so I think with, Marcel Duchamp, even though he's always relevant, was especially relevant. And then you get Joseph Kosuth at this time really driving it home with engaging viewers actively in the art display space to help him derive meaning and help him find a way of navigating the world of the real. Isn't that interesting? I mean, this is what conceptual art has as its space, these kinds of questions. And I hope that those of you who think conceptual art is just a waste of time, that's fine. I don't really care. What I do care is I hope that you can see that there is something to be engaged about it. So for the assignment for this, well, actually for this particular module, there are two distinct assignments. One is making your own ready-made, and another is wrapping. And I mentioned to Whitley that I'm going to expand all this a week probably because I forgot that this was a big holiday. Which reminds me, Sylvia, are you planning on doing anything since you don't have to go to school tomorrow?
I just have family coming over to my house for dinner and fireworks.
Fireworks are never rarely a bad thing. I don't know if I mentioned to you, I grew up with several brothers. My mom was the only woman who was a licensed pyrotechnician in our county. And a big part of that is so that she would know first how to treat serious burns and to have the training to be able to put out most types of fire. So yeah, we had a pretty cool mom growing up. But yeah, fireworks are wonderful. The two assignments, the ready-made assignment and the wrapping assignment, I want to see if we could find, okay. I want to talk about both of those, and I want to share a couple examples. Because we have a couple photos from people in this class of people that have already done this. So I want to share that was put in the discussion. I don't know if you can hear our Chihuahua. She is crying about everything today, and it is getting just a little nerve-wracking.
Mine was crying too today, so it must be something in the air.
Yeah, it's wonderful, isn't it? Okay. Here we go. All right. I'm going to show two images of ready-mades that were done in this class. And I'll tell you why these are successful, or we'll talk about why these are successful. Okay, so this one, the requirements for the ready-made is to take an ordinary object, put it in a completely different context, and then write a new context for it and photograph it in a different way than is expected. I think that I really like how this one is photographed because a person put it on a pedestal like it's in an art gallery. Now, what is this ordinary object?
A dart.
Yeah, it's a dart. It's just a regular dart. How did they change the context in this, of this thing?
It's pointing up when usually they're like stuck in a board with the duller side facing you.
Yeah, so it's been dramatically repositioned, so it's not the same thing as you'd expect. And they've also put it into what looks like a gallery space. It looks like it's on a pedestal. And I think that's really interesting. One of the things that Marcel Duchamp did that a lot of people don't realize is he only made about a dozen ready-mades during his long life. The reason was he found it increasingly difficult to follow his own rules. One of his rules was that the object had to be devoid of any emotional attachment. And then he would take it and develop an emotional attachment or relationship with it by creating a different context. Which I think is really interesting, because if we come across objects that we live with, it's almost impossible to have absolutely no attachment whatsoever with them, or make assumptions, or have memories associated with them. So I think that's a pretty big challenge. But I like how this is displayed, because like Whitley says, it does give a very different context to it. And then the person also wrote a couple of paragraphs about what the title was, how it was changed fundamentally because of the new context given to it. So they wrote a new story for it as well, which I think is really cool. Then this one is more of an action shot, which I think is really interesting. I like the title on this. The title is Hello. And which, I don't know how many of you guys in the class are old enough to have ever used one of these things. I'm old enough to remember my dad's personal computer that he brought home was a thing that was about the size of a dishwasher. And it was light enough that he could carry it in single-handedly, but most of the time we had to help him. And the modem dial-up was basically, it had two phone collars that you would stick the phone in, and he actually had to dial about 30 or 40 numbers on the phone to get it to connect correctly. So, I mean, that's how old I am. But this one, so we could tell it's a rotary phone. What gives it new context? I think some of the new context comes from it's a black and white photo. We're used to seeing, if we are old enough to recognize what this is, we're used to seeing the handset on it. We're used to seeing it hung up. And this, it looks like a call was interrupted. So it activates it. And then with the title, Hello, it activates that even more. I think it's really an interesting way of addressing this and giving it a new context. Whitley, since you're the artist, what other new context did you give to it?
I found that in my grandparents' house when I was in Virginia like a month ago. So I mean, they lived in that house for 50 plus years, which is probably pretty close to how old the phone is, I'm guessing. So I mean that it's now here in Utah with me, so it left, and I just have it kind of on display in my front entryway as decoration. There it was. I mean, it's more personal for me context wise, but I left it off the hook. I left the old phone number on there. Yeah, I mean that one was definitely more of like a personal, there's more personal context involved than like what your average viewer might see.
Right. Well, I think that's interesting, because it does give it. What's fascinating to me is whether or not other people know all the context that you're developing for something. The fact that you do it and that you have it as an artist, subliminally, some of that will be communicated. So I think it's really interesting. Yeah, see the old number is still handwritten by right there.
Yeah, well, I
Drawn
don't
by,
even think that's the same area code anymore. Like that 804, I don't even think that's, I was trying to look up their phone number to see if it shows, but it's not even like it's not even the right area code. So like it seriously is like frozen in that state because the area code's completely different in that area of Virginia now. So
I think that's really fascinating. I think it's really interesting. Oh, but thank you for letting me do that. Oh,
side note, I did resubmit it with your notes on the other thing, like with
oh, okay.
that corner
Okay.
fixed. So not in the discussion one, but in the other submission part, I did resubmit
Okay.
that.
Excellent. Very good. Well, so the idea of the ready-made, and when you hear Whitley talking about this, you can tell that there's a lot of personal attachment and history associated with this phone. And I think that's the thing that is so interesting to me about the ready-made is that if you wanted to, you could just grab an old shoe and take a picture of it and send it in. That doesn't really do much. That's why I have everybody write about it. What makes this significant for you? And then the art does not reside in the piece. It resides in your working to communicate that new context that you gave to the piece, the new associations you have with it now. And I think that that's really interesting. I a while ago, I remember working with one of my kids through a really bad breakup that they had. And one of the problems that they were having is that everything they did, they'd done a lot with this kid who ended up just being a big ding dong. Of course, I'm the father, so I can see the ding dongness. But I remember my daughter was having a really hard time because everything seemed to remind her about him. So what we went through, we started making a list of the things that reminded her about this guy. And then we started actively making new memories that were happy memories that she could associate with those things. And we only had to do it for about 7 or 8 specific things. Then she got into this habit of whenever there was something that generated one of these memories, she would reframe it and create a new memory for it to be associated with. And that's the kind of process we're going through with these ready-mades, where the art resides in generating a new story, generating a new context, and then communicating some of that. We're not going to, we could spend hours with Whitley, but we're not going to ever be able to comprehend the depth of the engagement she has with this apparently simple object just because we don't share life experiences. But you can communicate a glimmer of that. And that communication starts opening up a doorway into the idea realms and into the imagination of the person that's the observer. And that numinous realm is where the art lies. Does this make sense to both of you guys, Whitley and Sylvia?
Yeah, it does.
Thank you. How about you, Sylvia? Is this helping?
Yeah, having the explanation definitely helps.
Okay. All right, great. Now, the other thing I want to talk about that comes right into this as well ties into another aspect of conceptualism. Another aspect of conceptualism is related to the ready-made. It's a forced changing of context. One of the problems that a lot of people that say that they do not understand modern art is they don't feel that there's a shared context. They don't feel that there's any sort of a shared connection. And what Jean-Claude and Christo did with the wrapping, and that's the second part of this module, is they forced an engagement with that lack of familiarity. And they did it almost tongue in cheek. So people are confronted with these objects that are obviously wrapped in plastic, and instead of having to give a lecture on the monkey mind and why curiosity is so important and how it impacts our relationship with the world around us, Jean-Claude and Christo just kind of let people go. They depended on the intelligence and curiosity of their viewer to kind of create that realm of meaning for the wrapped object. And there's lots of different ways that you can do this. And I thought I wanted to share this with you because I think it's a really well done example. And there's a lot of things that I'm seeing that are brilliant ideas that I think just need a little bit of tweaking. And so I've written back, I suggest doing this and this. If you have any questions about that, let me know, because we want these to look finished and complete, but also deal with the idea, the concepts in the lesson. We'll talk more about this next week. Like I said, I will change the due dates so that you don't have to worry about doing it over a vacation weekend. Now, the reason why I really enjoy this one is that the person took time with it. And they were working through ideas as they were developing it. Now, you know, ostensibly this is just a branch with a bunch of string and rope wrapped around it. But there are some things that are going on that I think are really fascinating. One is they use several different colors, but they use several different colors on purpose. So it looks like it's been put together on purpose. They use several different kinds of material. I see something that looks kind of like embroidery floss or yarn, maybe. I see like packing string, and I also see rope or clothesline. And then the person doing this also did some things to kind of interrupt our visual expectations. We're looking with the color banding. There are patterns that are started and then changed. There are rhythms that are built and then played with, both in the wrapping and in the colors and material used. And I don't know if you can see my mouse, but at the joint of, you know, the last joint of the big stick and then the base, we get some really intriguing wrapping that's done, and, you know, very intentionally done, that creates this kind of a visual rhythm that's a counterpoint to the very consistent wrapping that's done around the body of the stick everywhere else. I think it's really interesting. Remember when we looked at Jean-Claude and Christo, I pointed out that they would do all these drawings and paintings of things before they wrap them and try to work out how visually they could make it interesting with where the ropes are going. And I'm going to see if I can find, let's see. Okay, you hear me tapping away because I'm trying to find some images of some of their drawings that they did beforehand to show this to you. Okay, here's some good ones. Okay, in this tab, we say here's the Reichstag wrapped. And, you know, some of these are photos, but then we start going down here, we can see that they are wrapping things. They're drawing out and painting out what this will look like, where the ropes will go. I'm going to blow this up just a little bit so you can see that. So this is a wrapped building. And they would do a lot of proposals where they would do this kind of thing. But what's fascinating to me is that a lot of the ropes and where they would decide where to put things were not intended to be functional, but it was intended to be visually interesting. You know, like wrapping these trees so that typically, if you've ever worked with arboretum or gardening shop, they'll wrap the trees very differently than this, specifically to protect the branches and the foliage. So it's they, you know, and they know this because they worked with trees for quite a while. So he was wrapping this specifically so it kind of mimic sails, and I think that's fascinating. Or some of these other ones, drawing images about what the gates in Central Park might look like, how different things, you know, drawing this out so you could see what different colors would look, how different colors would look with this kind of thing, where they would fold the cloth, where they would fold the plastic, where they would put the rings to suspend it, because they visually, you know, they were thinking it through and they wanted it to be visually interesting. Like this is the Arc de Triomphe is another famous one of theirs. And when you look at this drawing that he did, he was really trying to figure out how many of these ropes should I put up the side? You know, where would it look best? How can I make this to fit people's expectations and then play with them as well? You know, how many folds should we have in the cloth going all the way around this thing? And I think it's astounding how he thought about all that as he was doing the wrapping. Now, I don't think it's important for you to do a pen and ink sketch of what you're doing necessarily, but I do want you, I think that would probably take you too long, but I do think it is important to think this through. And the reason why I'm saying this is I told you about the absolute worst paper mache sculpture I've ever seen for this class. Do you remember me describing it to you?
Yeah, you said it was like drippy, or like paper was hanging off of it and like it just looked wet and not.
It looked terrible. I think that, and that same guy did the absolute, you know, thankfully for me, because I have really good examples, but he also did the absolute worst example of the wrapped project I've ever seen, which is he took 1.5 inch wide blue masking tape, tore about maybe 10 strips of it, and just draped it over something and just let it hang loose. And it was terrible because he bragged about how it only took him 10 minutes. Well, that's not the point. You're supposed to be thinking about this. If you want to use tape to wrap something, what I would do is I'd first wrap the object with plastic bags so you don't ruin the object with it, stick them from the tape, but then use several different kinds of tape. See what the tape does. Use colorful tape underneath and clear tape on the outside. Maybe even wrap with clear plastic wrap, and then you know, wrap tape around the object, wrap it with clear plastic wrap, and then wrap tape around that and see what that does. Maybe you'll want to use electrical tape and masking tape and duct tape. You know, what kinds of things. Maybe you even want to put in a dollar store tape measure. You know, like the measuring tape you use for doing quilting or something, to play with different ideas of what tape means. How much of the object are you going to show? Are you going to hide all of the object? Is like on the stick figure that was done, are we seeing, we know, we have an idea it's a stick because the person wrapped it so tightly with the ropes and cords and yarn that we can see the stickness of the stick come through. But maybe you want to be more like Judith Scott, where she would make these huge cocoons that bear absolutely no relationship shape-wise with what's underneath. Another one of the artists that you looked at uses sisal rope, and he takes farm equipment and antique tools. He puts them in, he wraps them together so that what you see is, it looks like a cocoon from a spider's nest or something, because it's so hard to tell what's inside. So there's a number of different ways to go with this, but I want you to think about that and write about it as you work on it or after you're all done, to try to articulate some of the thoughts that you had about it. I think it can actually be kind of fun doing that. And please, when I'm making comments on your things, if it doesn't fit with what you wanted to do, think about the comments, and you can write me back and tell me it doesn't fit quite right, or see if it does engage some more ideas.
I have a question about that while you're on the subject. Do
Yeah.
you just want us to like write it on the feedback? Because like I didn't necessarily agree with your comments on mine because I feel like I was intentional in how I wrapped it. But like if I need to type in the add a comment, like I am prepared to defend it, but I also understand that like I'm learning it, like I'm learning the concept too. So like I don't know if that makes sense. Like, so do we just
Right.
type on like add a comment, like writing back to you, kind of defending what we did? Like, is that what we're
Yeah,
supposed to do?
on the
Okay.
assignment page,
Yeah.
there's something that you can respond back. Yeah, go ahead and do that.
Okay.
Somebody did that because the only photo that made it through was not a very good one, and they were able to show what they were doing.
Okay.
That does remind me of something else too. In the assignments where I ask you to submit the PowerPoint and the critiques, there are three principal movie files that the system will allow me to open, and those are MOV, MP4, and WAV files. Right now, my Canvas access will not allow me to open any other movie format. So this has nothing to do with what you were saying, Whitley, but you reminded me to comment on this. So if you did submit something and you get a 0, go back and read why, because it will be as simple as you just running it through a file converter and then sending me the MOV or WAV or MP4.
Okay. That kind of reminds me too. I did have a 0 on something, but I thought that was for the paper part of the project, not the service learning part of the project, which is what I'm doing. But we can talk about that after like class.
Oh, okay. Then
Like it's not
that'll give me a chance to look it up and everything too. Okay,
okay.
good. All right. All right. So that's pretty much all I wanted to cover today. And we do have, somebody did send in a peer and self-critique, and we will watch those together next week. And I have, it looks like 4 people sent in PowerPoints that I can actually open up. So I'll put those on, and as they come in, I will continue to put those on. But yeah, please continue sending those in. That is looking really great. And let's see, it was Margaret that sent in the peer and self-critiques early. She gets a big extra credit bump for that. So there's still time to get extra credit on that. Do that in the next couple of weeks. That'll be great. All right, Sylvia and Whitley, do you guys have any questions about this contemporary processes, conceptual art stuff, particularly wrapping and ready-mades?
I think I'm good.
Okay. How about you, Sylvia?
I didn't have any questions about that. I just had one question about like the service learning.
Okay.
So I finished my service learning and I gave it to the group or performance group that I did the service project for. Do we need to submit like photos or anything of that?
I think that would be really nice to have your final the final opinion paper, the final five paragraph write up on everything. If you wanted to put in a couple photos with that would be awesome.
Okay, yeah, because I've got like my photos that I've taken like during the building process and then the final one of that. But like the actual, like what it's gonna all look like with the backdrop and the boat and everything, they've put that together at like the Ceres for the Freedom Festival this
Oh, cool.
weekend. And so it'll actually be in use today, tomorrow, and Saturday. And so I wasn't sure if I should take photos of it actually all like together with people on it and whatnot as well.
Oh yeah, that'd be awesome.
Okay,
Yeah,
so
go for it. That'd be great.
just add all of those kinds of photos onto the opinion paper.
Yeah, definitely.
Okay, sounds good.
All right. All right. Well, if that is everything, then I am going to go ahead and say I hope you guys have a wonderful holiday and don't blow anything up that is not yours. And try not to get hurt by the fireworks. But enjoy your weekend. I will send this off with that Plato's Allegory of the Cave video. So watch that. So your 5 comments include one of the 5 observations about the Allegory of the Cave. And then I think that's it. If nobody has any other questions, I will extend the due dates for a week to accommodate the holiday. And then we will meet next week and talk more about stuff. All right.
Sounds good. I do have a question, but we can like stop the recording because it's more about like my grade when
Okay.
that's ready. So I can wait around
All
for a
right.
minute.
All right. Well, I'm going to go ahead and stop the recording right now then. And I hope you guys have a wonderful week, and I'll see you next week.
Thank you. Happy 4th.
Happy 4th.